Hey everyone, CJ here. Welcome to the first episode of Open the World Match. In this new series, I will be interviewing Dungeons and Dragons and other TRPG players, game masters, and game designers from all over the world to investigate the worldwide phenomenon of tabletop role-playing games. If you have ever wondered if the Japanese prefer Dungeons and Dragons or their own tabletop role-playing games, or if Australians play the game differently, then stick around and subscribe to the channel as I will ask your question directly. In this maiden episode, I will be interviewing Australia's own Justin Halliday, game master and designer of the Ennies Award winning tabletop RPG for children, Hero Kids. I will be asking him what the tabletop RPG scene in Australia is like, and also how Australians play it differently to Americans. Hey Justin, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, CJ?
Yeah, pretty good, yes. Okay, so this is going to be our first interview. This is going to be our around the world interview. I'm going to interview everybody from all different countries, starting from a place I'm really familiar with, Australia, because I'm living here. And of course, Justin, I've met you before. You are a great game designer. You have created Hero Kits and other stuff. And I also saw you playing Dungeons and Dragons last time. Okay, as an Australian, maybe it's a bit of a stupid question, but I have to ask it. Do Australians play Dungeons and Dragons?
Yes, we do. We just do it very badly, or very different. Actually, we don't. We do it. Often over the 40 years that Dungeons and Dragons has been around, I think it's been very hard to know how other people play the game. Because a lot of it is like this kind of oral tradition of how the game is played. People pick up the books and they might learn from one person who's come from one country to another, or someone who's traveled. But nowadays, when we have so much actual play content on YouTube, you can see that our tradition of play is the same as everyone else's, except that on YouTube, a lot of there's a lot of the more theatrical kind of approach to some of the actual plays. But you can see when you get the real ones, or you get podcasts about people playing, that they have all the same kind of style of play that we do here, and they have all the same challenges that we face, whether we're game masters or players or whatever. So it's really even though the kind of the hobby may have grown in isolation here, just from the books or just from little bits of learning and knowledge transfer, they've all kind of converged into this same kind of global way of playing role-playing games.
Even like some American shows like Critical Role or some other like Adventure Zone, those sort of stuff are pretty popular in Australia too, isn't it?
Yeah. The kind of the revitalization of Dungeons and Dragons that we've seen over the last couple of years, those shows have been kind of pivotal in that, and a lot of people are coming into the hobby now because they've been listening or watching, Critical Role on Twitch, or listening to the podcast, listening to Adventure Zone and other games as well. So. That's coming with certain expectations that maybe are slightly different from actual table play, but the experience is very similar.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about that. It's like some people say what you see online is usually different from what people experience around the table. So, so before all these shows started coming in, is there a certain really sort of an Australian way of playing that you see is getting changed?
No, I think that that there's always going to be different people who kind of who different parts of the game appeal to. So let's keep going. So I think I sometimes think that things like Critical Role and those things are performances, and what the performance is different from the experience you might have as a person who's participating in a thing. This is like the difference between watching professional sports people play a game and amateurs like ourselves playing the game, or semi professionals. So there's a level of theatricality there that you don't get at a normal table. And at a normal table, when you're playing D&D or another game, you have all sorts of kind of distractions and all sorts of other things going on. When people play a home game, they're in their house, they're thinking about food, there's dinner, there's snacks, there's all those sorts of things. Whereas when you're doing a podcast, a game for a podcast or a game for live streaming, you have the undivided attention of your players for a period, for those 1, 2, 3 hours. So I don't think that there's much different, here in Australia. We've got the same. Everyone has the same challenges. Everyone, from all the podcasts I listen to, everyone has the same situations. They're playing with the same tools. They're telling very similar stories. We just maybe have a slightly different accent when we do it. One thing I have noticed though, actually, is that when I am role playing, I often fall into different accents with my characters I'm playing. So I fall into American accents or other accents. I find it very difficult to role play an Australian, and I wonder if that's because all of our, so much of our media comes from overseas. It comes from America or England or other places, and there's so little of it that we get from ourselves. So that's one thing that I do find challenging and different about role playing here in Australia compared to other places.
Wars always sound Scottish, isn't it? I guess, like
Yeah.
World of Warcraft started doing that. What sort of like RPG creature do you think should have an Australian accent?
Oh gosh, an Australian accent. So, I mean, maybe if you're doing some kind of post-apocalyptic thing, you could, if you're doing Mad Max, I think you could stick with the Australian accent. Then, that's a piece of, of media of our cultural identity that is global, and that you do associate, or I associate with Australianness. Whereas, a lot of other stuff, whether it's kind of medieval stuff, you go for English or Scottish accents, these kind of European accents. If I'm playing a modern sort of thing, it might, skew towards American accents. If it's a space thing, I'm not sure how an Australian accent in space would go. It's very strange.
Yes, and how about the like logistics? Australia is really enormously large place. It's like,
Mm.
and most of the population is located around like a few cities, and but
Hmm.
still, it's a quite a distance to go from one place to another. Maybe like a game
Hmm.
shop could be like dozens of kilometers away. So,
Mm.
how do people find that games here? Do people go to each other's houses more often, or do you find that more people go to game shops?
Well, I mean, certainly before 5 years ago, everyone played at home. I think, and then with the kind of introduction of organized play through the Pathfinder Society, and the Dungeons and Dragons Encounters kind of program, which probably are a bit more than 5 years ago now, but in that kind of time period, they started to see people playing at game shops and at other kind of organized locations, aside from conventions, obviously, where we didn't even have. Well, we have a bunch of smaller conventions, but not like PAX that we've had now for the last 5 years, where there's a lot of play. Um, so before this period, it was predominantly home games, and that's when you would meet people at school, at university, at work, and you would gather together a group of friends, and acquaintances and randos, maybe people that you've met somehow, and they would you would bring them to your house and you would play a strange game together, once a week or however often you play, and yeah. Well, it would. I mean, in the bush, you might that might be a worry. Um, but certainly we met through organized play, and that was one of the things that I wanted to, when I started designing role playing games, I wanted to get more involved in the community aspects of it and have more opportunities to play games. So I actually, at the time, a friend of mine had started a shop up, and I thought, okay, well, maybe we can do organized play in the shop. They were looking for activities to do, and we'd played. This was after the period of where Magic: The Gathering had been hugely popular, and had almost killed role-playing games for a period of time. And then sort of Magic had kind of the high tide was starting to recede a little bit. I mean, it's still hugely popular. Let's not take anything away from it. But people were coming back to role-playing games. D&D Fourth Edition had an organized play kind of scenarios and materials available. Pathfinder Society also had the same. So I offered to set up organized play at the shop, and this was they got the materials off Wizards of the Coast, and we started building from nothing at the Games Laboratory. And over a few years, we built up from me sitting at a table wondering if someone would show up on the night to having at our most successful nights we had 100 players there, and 11 or 12 tables running. It was almost out of control. We had to limit it after that. It was too much. It was too hard to manage. So I think that nowadays you have this mix of organized play at shops, because lots of shops are offering organized play. There's even some places here in Melbourne where we live. There's Gamezilla, which has Monday night games at a restaurant as well. You have Good Games and Games Laboratory offering D&D and other games on multiple nights of the week. And then now you have many more places to find home games as well. You have meetup.com, which has, looking for game kind of place. You have Reddit, where you can go and post about your games, whether it's in the /Melbourne or whatever your city is, or in an LFG kind of forum there. So there are a lot more ways of finding games and finding people to play with. But you always have the same issues of, and you can play online. Okay, this technology that we're using right here means that people can play just from their house. They don't have to leave. They can play, at night when the family's in bed, with people around the world. So there are so many more opportunities now that you don't have to just be finding and dragging your friends into play. And some of them are better, some of them worse, some of them make it harder or easier to find people that you're going to gel with and you're going to work well with. But once you get a good game, you want to keep playing that for as long as you can.
Yeah, and it's like it's the interesting thing is that I find that a lot of people in America play in comic book shops, don't they? It's like we don't have. I haven't seen any comic book shop that hosts a D&D game.
No, no, and a lot of those, in that period where Magic was big, a lot of those comic book shops, had Magic and kind of, there was that kind of crossover there of those groups. But yeah, I certainly haven't seen the comic book shops here doing D&D. Maybe it's maybe because they don't have activity spaces. Maybe because their areas are mainly set aside for stock and selling people action figures.
Besides Dungeons and Dragons, what other RPGs do you think are pretty popular in Australia?
In Australia, oh god, it's only D&D. I mean, look, if it's popularity, it's D&D and it's Pathfinder mainly. I went to what was a Gamezilla the other night to see what they were playing there, and to see what was going on, and that was interesting because they were playing like someone was playing Edge of the Empire, like the Star Wars RPG. Someone else was playing I think it was one of the End of the World games, like a no one was playing D&D, no one was playing Pathfinder, which was interesting because I think that people, if they're going to play D&D and Pathfinder, those people were at the big shops, playing the organized play. Here at Gamezilla, there were groups that were seeking out different experiences, and that was really interesting. That they were playing their own kind of homebrew stuff as well. So, but that wasn't, that was like 5 or 6 groups there on the night that I went. So, I don't think there's anything particularly different about the Australian role-playing game, market than anywhere else. 90% of people are playing D&D and Pathfinder, and right now, probably 60% of them are playing D&D. And then that other 10% are playing, whatever else is out there, which it's kind of a crazy market at the moment, and it's a crazy kind of ecosystem of what's being played. So I don't know why anyone would design a game other than D&D now, but anyway.
In Australia, the thing is, a lot of the TV shows and the stuff we get here come from America, isn't it? It's like a lot of cultural infusion from America. But is there like something that's really Australian that a genre that try to incorporate into D&D or maybe tabletop RPG? Just
Yeah, again, like this is like the accent thing earlier, where I can't play in my native accent when I'm doing characters. But I think definitely Mad Max. The post-apocalyptic is probably the genre that is most associated with Australia, and could, or maybe maybe people could play that kind of Australian crime thing. Again, we were thinking about this. We've just started a new campaign in my home game that we're going to start tomorrow night, so I really need to really think about that a lot. But we were talking about where we would set it, and it was going to be a kind of urban, urban kind of modern thing with a bit of magic in it. So, and I was trying to think of, okay, could I set this here in Australia? And I'm like, well, thinking, no, I want to set it somewhere else because I want to have this kind of otherness about it. And again, most of our media coming from other countries, it's hard to think of, games experiences in that Australian way. So definitely, if I was doing, a Mad Max thing, I think I could do Australian accents in it. But other than that, I'm not so sure.
Right, about the story of Ned Kelly though. Maybe we can do like an
Bush
armored,
Rangers, yeah.
Bush Ranger sort of story, and
Yeah, even like the Western. I mean, there've been a few Australian Westerns. I think that they're problematic eras. Because the whole settlement, the colonization of Australia was, and this is the same as in the US, the settlement of the US. These were all kind of eras that had vast horrific kind of injustices. So yes, you could probably do an Australian kind of Western, and there have been a few. I'm just thinking of films that are Australian and have that kind of Western feel to them. Was it The Proposition and a few others that have that? Yeah, and the Ned Kelly ones. That kind of the kind of bushrangery thing, whether it's the kind of Ned Kelly or the kind of that Robin Hood-esque kind of feel to it. But I don't think that. I don't think that we in Australia have built that mythology around those stories. Ned Kelly is the one
some
example.
people watching may not know what Ned Kelly is about. It's, I guess, they are like robbers and stuff like that. They go around the bush, they rob people. But Ned Kelly is a bit of a special case, isn't he? He is a bit of a Robin Hood sort of figure who.
Did he give the money? Did he give the money back though? I'm not sure. Well, the other thing about Ned Kelly is that he armored himself as well. He made armor out of big metal plates, and he was shot like 20 times or whatever when they finally captured him, and it didn't kill him, and they hung him in the end. So it did not end well for Ned Kelly. But I think that there is a mythology around Ned Kelly that is interesting, but certainly not to the extent of, say, Robin Hood, where they're this outlaw character. And I think that Robin Hood definitely has that kind of, stealing from the rich, giving to the poor, that sort of thing you can get behind. Ned Kelly, I'm not sure, ever achieved that level of, giving to the poor on the giving to the poor side.
Yeah,
But I think that's an Australian thing about that Australian standing up to authority and injustice and those sorts of things, which does come through in Ned Kelly, which is sort of there in Robin Hood as well, where there's the corruption of the police and, the righteousness of standing up to the police.